Hi, I'm Siddhant and I'll be conducting your technical interview today. Why don't you tell me something about yourself and why have you applied for this job?
Hello, my name is Amitabh Banerjee and I recently graduated from Symbiosis University with a specialization in BTech. I've been passionate about coding and technology ever since I was in high school, and as I went throughout my college career, I decided to hone in and focus more on Python as a language. During this time, I was able to create projects such as I did web development using Python. I was able to create a student management system in Python. I applied for this job because I believe it perfectly aligns with my career goals. I want to do a Python related job because I believe Python is going to be the language that will continue and help the IT industry grow and solve problems for the next 20 to 25 years. I'm capable of utilizing Python well and leveraging it enough to help you and your company on your projects for your clients. The reason I'm able to do this is because I recently achieved a Python certification from Ethan's Tech. I started off with the basics where I learned about data types. Then I moved on to logic building such as conditional statement, if else, for loops and things like that. Then I moved on to more advanced forms of Python such as beautiful soup for web crawling, object oriented programming, and how to use Python for analysis of data. What really helped me in this course was the trainers because they had a really big focus on how memory allocation and logic building works in Python. This helped me create a good base for myself in terms of coding. As a result, it has helped me improve my Python skills by leaps and bounds. Because of my base in Python and because of how confident I felt in it, I was able to move forward for competitive coding challenges and hackathons as well.
So Amitabh, I can see that you've opted for Python as your preferred language of development. What factors made you come to this decision?
Python is my preferred language of development because it's easy to use and it's easy to read. This makes it the perfect language for experienced and beginner developers. It also makes it easy to work as a team because if someone else writes a code in Python, it's easier to understand it and what they are trying to implement using that code. Another reason for Python being my preferred language of development is its versatility. You can do web development using Flask and Django. You can also do complex data analysis using NumPy, Panda, Matplotlib, and Seaborn. However, one of the main reasons I choose Python is not because of its coding ability, but rather because of its usage in the market. As time moves on, companies are increasing and so is our population. As population increases, the number of customers for each business increases. As customers increase, data increases, and all data analysis and management happens on Python. As the market will grow, the usage of Python will grow because all markets will start using Python more and more often. As a result, it will grow as a language. There will be new avenues to implement creative code. That's the main reason I've chosen Python as my preferred language of coding.
What are the difference between different Pythonic structures such as list, tuple, and dictionary? And in what scenarios would you use each of them?
It's a list, it's because it's mutable and it's enclosed within square brackets. Here the list fruits entails apple, banana, and cherry. Over here I'm using the append function to add date. If I were to print fruits again, it would come as apple, banana, cherry, and date. Why? Because lists are mutable. Let's take a look at tuples. Tuples are essentially the same as lists, however they are immutable and they have rounded brackets. Now let's move on to tuples. Tuples are essentially the same as lists, however they are immutable and they are written within rounded brackets. If I was to print out the coordinates over here in this tuple, I would get exactly the same values that I have put in over here, since a tuple is immutable. Next, let's take a look at dictionaries. Dictionaries arrive in key and value format. Here we have a dictionary called capitals. Over here the key is France, the value is Paris. Over here the key is Japan and the value is Tokyo. So if I was to say print capitals, open square brackets and put my key, which is France, my output would be the value that is corresponding to France, which is Paris. And that is the difference between dictionaries, tuples, and lists.
Well, you must have heard about the conditional statements provided by Python. I would like you to explain the conditional statements to me with the help of some examples.
Conditional statements allow developers to make decisions in Python. Essentially, conditional statements structure the code in such a way when the code meets certain conditions, only certain values will be printed. Let's take a look at this in the form of an example. Over here we have x is equal to 10. If x is greater than 0, print positive. And if x is equal to 0, print 0, else print negative. Now in this block of code, we see that if x is greater than 0, which in this case it is, it will print positive and it will ignore the other two parts of the code. The conditions to print positive have been met. If x was equal to 0, it would skip x is greater than 0 and move to L if x is equal to 0. In that case, x would be equal to 0, so it would print 0 and it would not move on to negative. Let's say now that x is equal to negative 10. In that case, it will go through this block of code and the conditions will evaluate to false. Then it will go through the elif block of code and the conditions will also evaluate to false. Then it will move on to the else part of the code where it will execute by default since all the other conditions are false. As such, printing negative. That is how conditional statements help developers make decisions based on certain conditions.
Why is the use of switch case discouraged in Python? And if I ask you to make use of the switch case forcefully, how would you implement it?
The use of switch case is discouraged in Python because there is no built-in statement for switch case. More importantly, if we take a look at the logic of switch case, it is quite similar to the if and else logic and it can be computed through the if and else logic in Python. However, just to explain switch case, let's go through a piece of code. Over here, I've defined a function to represent the first case. Then I've defined another function to represent the second case. Over here, I built a dictionary where the key is 1 and the value is the case 1 function. Then we have key number 2 and the value as the function. Over here, we have result where we have written switch get, open bracket, the first function and the default case. Depending on the user input, we can get any value. If the user was to put in value number 1, it would print result and we would get case 1. Similarly for 2, we would get case 2. And if the user was to put a value that was not 1 or 2, he would get the default case value.
What are the differences between for loops and while loops, and in what scenarios would you use them?
Loops in Python are used to execute a block of code repeatedly until certain conditions are met. There are two types of loops in Python which are mainly used, for loop and while loop. For loops are used when you know the number of iterations that are required in order to meet those certain conditions. So let's take a look at an example for loop. Over here we have a list of fruits, apple, banana and cherry. For each fruit in the list of fruits, print out the fruit. The outcome of this code will be apple in the first line, banana in the second line and cherry in the third line. While loops on the other hand are used when the number of iterations are not known until the conditions are met true. Let's take a look at an example for while loops. Let's say that the count is equal to 0. Now while the count is lesser than 5, print count. Count is equal to count plus 1. Now over here what we are trying to say is that the initial value of count is 0. While the value of count is lesser than 5, the code has to print the value. After it has printed the value, it will go and add 1 to the count and then go back and re-execute the block of code until count here is greater than or equal to 5.
Please explain the use of list comprehension with the help of example.
List comprehensions are a concise way to create lists in Python. It provides a readable and easier way to transform more complex forms of data without the need for hard coding these lists. Let's take an example. Here we have a list called squares where x square for x in range of 10. What does this mean? It basically means for each number from 1 to 10, we'll be taking the square of each number and making a list. When I type print squares, the output will be the square of each number. It will be the square of 1, the square of 2, the square of 3, the square of 4, the square of 5, the square of 6, the square of 7, the square of 8, and square of 9, and square of 10. Let's take a slightly more complex problem. Let's say we have a list called evens where x for x in range 10 if x modulus 2 is equal to 0. Now what this means over here is that in the range of 1 to 10, only if when the remainder of the number when divided by 2 is equal to 0 should be taken. Now when I say print evens, the output will be 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all the even numbers. That's what list comprehension does.
What are user-defined functions in Python? And I would like you to demonstrate how you as a developer would implement a user-defined function.
User-defined functions are blocks of code that are built to perform specific tasks. They help in improving the organization of the code, making it easier to read, and essentially helping the overall code, and essentially avoiding repetition. The way to define a function is by using the def keyword and then defining that following function in the next line with an indentation. Here's an example. Over here we have defined greet name function. Here we are returning hello, the very same name parameter that we have placed in the function above. Now in order to call this function, we are saying message is equal to greet keyword Alice. When we say print message, so now we have a variable name message which is holding the value of our function. When we say print message, we'll get this value back, which is hello name, and the name over here will be Alice because that is what we have defined here. So the output will be hello Alice.
If a particular task in Python can be completed using loops as well as functions, what would you choose? What are the factors that are going to be influencing your decisions?
The choice between a function and a loop depends on the specific task and the outcome you're trying to get. If you have repetitive operations with a logical group of data, then a function might be the best thing to use since it's able to encapsulate the logic well and makes it easier to read. On the other hand, we use loops when there are simple iterations without the need of reuse. However, we can make use of loops within the function, and usually if you want to execute complex logic in an easy to read manner, this is the best way to go. Let's take an example. Over here we have defined a function process data with a parameter data. For every item in the data, we are allowing it to pass. This showcases how we've used a for loop within the function.
What are the things you keep in mind when you make use of recursion?
Recursion is a programming technique where the function calls itself within the block in order to solve a problem. There are four main things that you need to keep track of when you are using recursion. Number one, base case. Ensure that a function has a base case to stop the recursion. If it doesn't, it will keep going on indefinitely. Secondly, progress towards base case. Each recursion should progress more and more towards the base case, thereby reducing the problem size. Number three, stack limitation. Most modern day computers have a stack limitation of 128. So always be aware of the recursion depth limit. And lastly, efficiency. Recursive functions aren't the most efficient in terms of memory usage. Sometimes you might have to use iterative loops. Therefore, you need to see which one is best for you in the code. Let's take an example to try and see exactly what recursion is. Here we are trying to find the factorial of n where n will be supplied by the user. Let's say n is equal to 4. Now here we are defining our base case. If n is equal to 0, return 1. The reason we say 1 is because the factorial of 0 is equal to 1. Right? Else return n factorial n minus 1. Now let's say we put 4 over here. 4 is not equal to 0, so it will go down here. Now it's saying 4 into factorial of 4 minus 1, which is 3. As a result, the function will be called again and it will keep on reducing and reducing until it reaches the base case, thus creating a recursive function.
So Amitav, please tell me, when and in what scenarios would you make use of a lambda function?
Lambda functions are also known as anonymous functions and they are denoted by the keyword lambda. They are short throwaway functions that can be reused elsewhere in the code. They are often used in contexts where full functions are sort of overkill and you want to utilize the same function you used above in a shorter manner. Here the lambda function lambda point 1 extracts the second element of each tuple to sort the list by the y coordinate. Lambdas are concise and can make your code more readable by eliminating the need for separate function definitions for simple operations.
Please describe the file handling mechanism and operation with the help of examples.
File handling is performed in Python using the built-in open function. It's essentially used when you want to utilize Python to access a file, go into it, read it, write it, or append certain data within the file. There are many modes to open a file. R is for read, W is for write, A is for append, and so on and so forth. Here's an example of reading a file. Over here we are opening a file .example.txt in read mode and saving all of that in file. Then we are adding that file over here. We are reading that file and saving it to content. Then we are printing out the content so that we can see what is written in the file. Now we have a similar example where we will be using the write mode. However, it's important to note that when we use the write mode, whatever we add onto the file will be added and everything previously will be erased. Over here we've opened example.txt in write mode as file, and then in that file we have written hello world. Similarly, we have used the same example, but we have done it in append mode. Now it's important to remember, in append mode, unlike write mode, whatever we write into the file will go along with whatever data is already there. Over here we have opened example.txt in append mode as file. In the new line we have written appended text that has been added to all the existing data within the file.
What are packages in Python and how do you import packages into your code?
Packages are collections of modules that are organized by a hierarchy in init.py files. They help organize the modules, which makes it easier to manage large code bases. A module is a single file containing Python code, whereas a package contains multiple modules of Python code. Let's take a look at an example of a package. First, let's start by importing a module into our code. Let's start with import math. Math over here is the module we are importing into our code. Print math.square root of 16. You can also import specific functions or classes from a module. For example, from math import square root pi. Print square root of 16, print pi. Over here the output will be 4. Over here the output will be 3.14. For third-party packages, you usually install them using pip and then import them to your code. Let's take an example. Over here we've used pip to install request, then we have imported request, and then we have taken something from request and attached it to the variable response. Then we have printed out response, and accordingly we show you how to use pip in order to install third-party packages.
Please explain the concept of exception handling with the help of an example, and how would you use the try and except blocks?
Exception handling in Python is essentially used to handle runtime errors gracefully so that the program can keep going without crashing. So over here we are trying to divide 10 divided by 0. Now usually things cannot be divided by 0, it causes a 0 division error, but because we know it's causing an error, we put it in the except block. Now over here, once the except block catches the error, it prints out cannot divided by 0. If for some reason it was to continue and the except block was not to catch it because there was no error, the try was done and it was successfully executed, it will go to else, where it would print division successful, and then finally print out execution completed because the execution across all blocks have been completed.
Well, thank you for your time today. Would you like to ask some questions before we wind up today?
Thank you for the opportunity to interview. I do have a few questions. If I get selected, what projects will I be working on and with which team? Also, I'd like to know what are the next steps in the interview process. I would also like to know if you have any feedback for me and if you would recommend that I work on any particular part within Python to improve my knowledge and my coding skills.